You're listening to Popcorn in Orbit, a podcast for sci-fi lovers of all galaxies, hosted by filmmakers Jeremy Major and Ian P. Causer.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. You've got Jeremy here in Canada, alongside Ian in the UK. And our special guest today is in California. So we're going global is what's happening here. Ian, how you doing?
I'm good.
This is exciting because our guest has ties to a lot of effects history. He has been involved with so many different projects, in particular, like practical effects, model making, all this kind of thing. So this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about.
Yeah, I can't wait. And I've been friends with Tim for years, so I've badged him into coming into this podcast. And I'm very grateful you're here, buddy.
We've got Tim Partridge with us today.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Glad to be here.
Let's go back in time a little bit, because I know you've been a part of some of these more traditional effects approaches. Maybe you can talk a bit about how you got into the world of effects.
Quite a circuitous route, I would say. I had 25 years in movie sound, first of all.
Right.
And it kind of went from the cutting edge of the sound side to the traditional old school edge of the effects side. So it was quite unusual. The common factor was that I was here in the Bay Area. And as we all know, a lot of amazing movies were made with very cutting edge special effects by Lucasfilm and ILM in the Bay Area. So that's really how it happened. I was here when the opportunity arose. But no, initially I was in sound for 25 years, loved the business, decided I wanted to stay in the business, but I needed a change at a certain point. And opportunity came up here in the Bay Area to move into special effects, and did that for the next 12.
So when you say sound, like you were working for Dolby, was it digital sound then?
That's right. Going back in time, as you said, I was a musician. I came to the whole industry from the music side. As a kid, my childhood passion was music. My mother got me into movies, took me to see The Sound of Music 7 times.
Wow.
Some of those in the theater, but mostly on VHS and on TV when it was there. Her favorite movie was Lawrence of Arabia, which eventually became mine. But growing up, it was always music was my passion. But at school, my strengths were scientific side, so maths, physics, that kind of stuff.
So the music influence came from the family, but your tendency was more scientific, was it?
I think so, but I wanted to go into music, certainly. So college, I actually got a place in a music school, the only jazz school in England, which happened to be in my hometown of Leeds. And then my father intervened and decided I ought to take a course that would get me a real job. So we got out, Ian will remember the Ucker book, which is a book that's about a foot thick with every course in the country at every university. And we found one that combined music with engineering. It was the only one. It was modeled on a German course called Tonmeister, Soundmaster, of which there are a number in Germany, but only one in England. Anyway, I applied. I got onto that course. So I was able to satisfy both my interests, art and science.
Oh, very cool.
And that was geared towards going into the music world as a recording engineer. We did music just along with all the other music students, but we also did the math, the physics, the electronics, the acoustics of the science of sound.
Right.
4 years of doing that in university led me to realize I didn't want to do that as a career. Kind of out of the blue, I came across a lecture in London given by a movie editor called Terry Rawlings. I'd always enjoyed movies. That was my second passion. But living in the north of England, you never dreamed that it's a career because you're about as far away from Hollywood as Tatooine, right? So, and back in the day, there were never any programs, content about how movies are made. So it didn't kind of generate that interest. But I had the interest from watching movies, a lot of them. And of course, 77 Star Wars came out, and that really got me interested in how they are made. So I went along to this lecture given by Terry Rawlings, who had finished Alien and just finished Blade Runner as the editor. And back then, the picture editor was the sound editor as well. And his talk was actually about sound in the movies. And that's where things came together for me, because I thought I would love to work somehow in the movies. And apparently there was sound in the movies. And
Who knew?
I knew a little bit about sound by then. So I was completely fascinated by Terry's talk. He went on to do a number of major films, worked with Ridley an awful lot. And I was able to meet him again later in my career on a James Bond movie. And I was able to thank him for giving me that spark that got me into the business. And my way into the business was with, as you said, with Dolby.
Okay.
Never knew what they did. I just knew that their name was on the end of almost every movie by that time in the early 80s. And their name was also on every movie theater.
Yeah, true.
So I knew they had something pretty good going, and it was in the area that I wanted to work. So I applied for a job. I got the job, and within 6 months, I was working on movies. And never looked back.
And so with Dolby, like you're credited as a sound consultant, Dolby sound consultant on movies like Willow, well, a million different movies here.
The role of a sound consultant is quite varied, and I loved it. It can be anything from talking to the sound recordists as they're heading out onto location to help them understand what to record, how to record, if it's their first stereo movie, but mostly it takes place in post, and it's kind of a quality control role. So we will get there when they're putting the mix together. We'll get there at the beginning of the mix to make sure everything in the studio is correctly aligned to an international standard, so that what they're listening to is a fair representation of what they're actually recording. And then we'll go in again at the end of the mix and help them record it, make sure it is going down correctly, because that's the one time you record it and then it plays a million times across the world in theaters, right? So if you don't get the recording right, nothing will ever be right. So we would supervise that, make sure the recording was right, and they would handhold it through all the other processes. It goes from the recording, whether that's on magnetic tape or digital audio in the studio, to the lab.
Right.
And back in the day, they would then print it into an optical track, and we would check that and make sure that was all done properly before they make 5,000 prints. The negatives got to be right. And then we would turn up at various important screenings. So the director wanted a Dolby guy there at his premiere. He often wanted us there at his press screenings and festival screenings, anywhere where it was really important that the movie came across exactly as the director intended. And that was our job, to make sure that's what happened.
That's cool. Incredible. Yeah. So it's about creating a consistent experience, I guess, no matter where it is. Is that?
Well, but also enhancing the overall experience of the movie.
Sure.
So that's what I always enjoyed, being a technologist and a musician or artist. I always enjoyed being able to use technology to enhance the experience. One of the later things I did at Dolby was move us from a purely audio company into video as well, as the transition to digital cinema was happening. It was clear to me and others that we needed to be a player in that, and we wanted to be a leader in that. So we moved the company into a video company as well. And also at the same time, 3D was coming round yet again.
Right, yeah.
This was in the late 90s, early 2000s. And because I've always been interested in technology and the experience, I'd always been interested in 3D. And always wondered why it gave every generation, every 7 years, gave them all a headache. So when it came around the last time and everything was digital, then I thought, well, this time maybe we can get it right. But no, I think I'm somewhat responsible for pushing 3D in Hollywood and giving everybody a headache yet again.
And where can people reach you to complain about it? So you made your way over to the U.S., obviously, and so what started that shift into the effects world?
The effects world, it was just a change in career. I thought I'd pretty much done everything I could do in sound. It was getting to the transition to digital had completely happened. I was fortunate to be in sound when it was going from kind of stereo to surround sound. So I was able to help introduce surround sound to not the US and the UK, because it was pretty established by the early 80s was surround sound. But there were other places, India, China, that I was able to go to and introduce surround sound to their movie industry.
Really? Yeah.
And then in the 90s, I was able to participate in rolling out digital audio. So that was very cool. And of course, along the way, we went from 4-channel to 5.1 to 7.1. So they were all new ways that a director could use sound. But certainly by the 2005-ish time, when digital cinema first came out, that was the next big transition.
Sure, yeah.
To digital cinema and getting cinemas actually to be able to reproduce exactly what the director wanted, which was always our goal. No more scratches on the print and all that dirt that you get. It was just awesome to see a digital presentation for the first time.
Yeah.
But then, a few years into there, we're getting into really small incremental improvements, adding an extra channel is not the same as adding a whole surround channel to stereo, right? So the improvements are getting smaller and smaller.
Right.
I was ready for a change. So I took a year off, and I was approached because 3D had been the last project that I'd headed up at Dolby. I was approached by a company here in the Bay Area that had developed 3D cameras and wondered if I could help them take them to market. And that was the company that came out of ILM. When ILM left the studios in Marin and went to the Presidio in San Francisco, the group that stayed in Marin were the practical guys, the practical effects technicians and the camera guys, because ILM were transitioning to pretty much being a digital-only company at that time. This was 2006. So the guys that in the camera group, as well as the practical effects group, approached me, and I joined those. Unfortunately, it was an ill-fated venture, but a year later, I was now involved in practical effects through that company. I loved that world. I loved the guys who did it. They'd been doing it for years, and they'd been working on all the Star Wars films and everything through the 90s and the early 2000s. So it was a great experience for me. I decided to start my own company, and with those contacts there, I figured practical effects was on the decline, clearly, as digital effects was on the rise. But I figured there was a few more years of some directors wanting to do things practically,
sure,
albeit an ever decreasing number of shots. But those shots tended to be the big flashy ones, which is why they wanted to do it practically. Yeah, we started that company in the same building that ILM had been in, and then the successor company. We downsized from 2 or 3 stages to just 1 stage because I could see the work was getting smaller. And we managed to make it work for 12 more years, working, doing practical effects for, those guys that still wanted it. Largely for ILM, who were obviously the experts. Even though they themselves did all the digital work, if they found a shot that thought would benefit from being practical, they would come to us and we'd execute it for them.
All right, so tell us a bit about what some of those shots might be. Like, what types of elements would you be working with?
So there were 2 areas I would say that would be practical. One would be anything that's dynamic. Because what's beautiful about practical is that you never know exactly what's going to happen. You blow something up and you don't know where that shrapnel's going. And sometimes it goes in really interesting places, which you could never have predicted or simulated digitally. So it's for those beautiful accidents that we used to say.
Sure, yeah.
That people would want those.
Was this a common thing, was blowing stuff up?
Mostly. It was dynamic,
That's awesome.
Stuff. Yeah. It was dynamic stuff because CG at that point had gotten so good that anything static might as well be done in CG. You've got all the flexibility of changing it as the director changes his mind, or the 15 producers that are now on these big films have their input. So there's lots of advantages, of course, to CG and for static stuff like that. And even now, even the dynamic stuff in CG is just incredible. But, in those last 15 years or so, there's been times when blowing a model up just gives the best result. And it's also a kind of a grounding. A lot of directors, they want to have a grounded effect, and it does look
Yes.
real. Some people will still say that, CGI looks like CGI, and it is getting better and better and better, obviously, as the years go by. But if you can do it practically, and there's limitations of practical, of course, and I'm sure we'll get into those. But it was mostly things blowing up, and also elements, natural elements, which was one thing that CGI took a while to be able to be good enough that the directors would use it for things like water, smoke, fire. So we would do those as just elements for the effects company to composite into the image,
I see, yeah.
along with their digital effects. And again, it just gave an aura of realism because it was real.
So when you talk about something, when it being more grounded, to do it practically, it's the idea that it kind of elevates the CG effects by having those shots interspersed. Is that sort of the idea?
That's a great way of saying it. And and depending on the film and depending on the director, some of them really want to convince the audience that it's happening here on Earth, right?
Sure.
Some of these films. So the more grounded it can be, the better. But it depends on scale and everything. So, we've got to make it look as real as possible for that to work.
So what are some memorable films and experiences from that?
Some of the bigger stuff we did, first really big one was The Lone Ranger, Gore Verbinski. He wanted the trestle train bridge that was blown up by Johnny Depp and Armie Hammer.
Yeah.
Gore had worked with our pyrotechnician, a guy by the name of Jeff Herron, who has a million credits and great experience. Worked with him on Pirates of the Caribbean. So he knew he was in good hands. So yeah, that was an awesome thing. We did that bridge. We did 2 or 3 sections of it. And the biggest they were all at 1/5 scale, which was determined largely by the grain of the wood, because some of these things were close up. Anything that's close up to camera, that's when practical comes into its own, because it looks real. Often we're doing the piece that is close to camera, and then the digital extensions are done as you get further away, because that looks perfect. So yeah, 5th scale, it was a 150-foot tall bridge. So we built a bridge 30 foot tall and blew it up.
Outside, I take it, not in studio?
So this is outside. It was in a 50 by 50 water tank, because the bridge crossed the river, and the lower explosions were close to the base, of course, which is where Conto was able to place the explosives. So we had explosions going off under the water. So you get the plume of water going up, as well as explosions within the bridge. So this is for the up angle, and we had tethers on certain pieces of the bridge, because Gore had wanted this huge beam to fly towards camera, of course. So we had to make a huge beam, or a 5th scale beam, fly towards camera. So we did that with pulling a wire at the exact right moment, and all sorts of stuff. And then the other shot was from the train's point of view. So as the train's approaching this bridge, the bridge collapses in front of it. That was another section of bridge that we had to have super high up in the air, and Jeff rigged that so it would collapse exactly the way that Gore wanted. But not only that, it was all wired. So then about 3 hours later, we'd raised it back up again so we could do take 2.
Oh my gosh.
So each of these things, these days, or I should say in the last years, we would only ever get 1 or 2 takes.
Wow.
Back in the day, when practical was the only thing they were doing, I'm sure they did many more than that. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the last big one that we did was for episode 9, Rise of Skywalker. And if you remember the Kijimi planet being exploded by the Star Destroyer with a laser beam, we went to ILM to talk to the supervisor, Roger Guyette. And of course, with Star Wars, practical is not only whether it's the right thing for the shot. In the Star Wars things, it's the right thing for the audience, because the audience has grown up on Star Wars being a practical effects franchise. So even though most of it's gone digital, they always like to have a little bit in there to keep the fans happy and to give it that look again.
Sure.
Apart from doing a bunch of small elements again, as we always do for most films, that come our way. The big shot for that was the explosion of Kojima. So that was the first time we blew up a planet.
Not many people can say that.
Roger described it to us as he wants something that we've never seen before, which is always interesting. Because, of course, Star Wars has blown up a lot of different things, spaceships, things in the planets in the past. But he wanted something that looked different to all those ones in the past. And pretty much the brief was, I want it to go boom, 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 boom. And that was it. That was what we got. So,
but that probably made perfect sense at the same time.
It gave us some indication of what he wanted. And it had to look like nobody's ever seen before.
Right.
Yeah.
So, long story short, we ended up with a 2 takes. But there's a lot of testing beforehand. So we built several planets. Our planet ended up being a half dome, 4 foot in diameter, with about a 4 or 5 inch thick crust, multiple layers, multiple colors, so that as that flies towards camera, it looks somewhat realistic.
Made of what? What would this be made of?
That was pyrosil, which is like plaster of Paris.
Oh,
in
okay.
Ian's terms.
Thank you.
And 28 different charges.
Wow.
And they're all timed to the millisecond, so that we're not only got the boom, 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 but each one was composed of probably 5 different explosions. Shot at about 1,000 frames a second.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that.
Yeah, and if you think it was on screen for, let's say, 4 seconds, what's that, 96 frames? 96 frames goes by through our camera in less than 1/10 of a second. So the whole thing happens in 1/10 of a second, but it's 4 seconds of screen time, and all those 28 charges are going off at their particular allotted time within that 1/10 of a second. So that when you expand it, it looks as amazing as it did.
I can see where your interest in the scientific is coming into play here. The arts and the science really meet up, don't they?
They do.
Yeah.
They do. Yeah.
That's incredible. Talk to us a bit about this building that you were in and some of the history there and what that was like working with these people who had been a part of, maybe these ILM projects and just the history in general that surrounded you there. Was that exciting as a film fan?
It was a big draw, obviously. Star Wars was a big influence on me in '77, so it kind of was almost like coming full circle to be amongst the people that had been part of that franchise and even in the building that had been part of that franchise. So a huge part. So the first Star Wars was made down in LA, in Van Nuys, and then George brought a large part of the ILM crew up to the Bay Area, and they built the stages and model shops and camera rooms in Marin, on this campus. And at its height in the 90s, there would have been about 10 buildings that were all occupied by various departments of ILM as they were working not only on Georgia projects, but on virtually every major project of the 80s and 90s.
Sure.
Right? But then eventually George wanted to consolidate everybody into one new building, and that ended up being in the Presidio in San Francisco. So in 2006, they moved out. The practical guys and the camera crews kind of stayed behind to carry on doing the practical work. So yeah, it was awesome in that. And in the building that we actually occupied, which they called C building, it was one of the very few that they actually built, purpose built for their work. So many films had happened in there, including Star Wars, actors being in there as well as blowing up. The walls were peppered with holes from all the explosions that had taken place in there. But yeah, you could really feel the history. And in that building, they also started the transition to digital as George was pushing, as you know, the innovator that he is. He was pushing in the digital side. So they started digital in there, digital picture editors that eventually became Pixar was started in there. The sound group that was started in there that eventually became Skywalker Sound.
Is that THX?
THX was developed in there.
Was that a competitor to you at that time that it was developed, was that a competitor to Dolby?
Not really, only in the
No.
minds of the public sometimes.
Okay, yeah.
We were both trying to get the best experience possible. And we were working very closely with Tom Holman, who was the developer of THX, obviously, or I should say, my colleagues in San Francisco were, because I was in London at the time. Dolby encodes the film in the studio and then decodes the film in the theater and then tries to establish this international standard. THX took it a little further in terms of demanding the kind of acoustic response you would have in that theater and the types of loudspeakers you would have in that theater. They had a list of THX approved amplifiers, loudspeakers, and if you bought your equipment from that list, you were THX certified. So they took it to the next level in terms of quality, which was awesome. So we were working hand in hand. To give you an idea how revered this building is, certainly by that film community, we hosted crew reunions on the anniversaries of the franchise.
Okay.
So the 40th anniversary of A New Hope was we hosted it, and then they all come back from around the world.
Yeah,
because they all want to see each other again. It was They had an amazing community, all so creative, and what they created was as a company was obviously so special. I felt the same way about Dolby. That was a special company as well.
Yeah,
pushing the boundaries in audio, and they were doing it in the image world, and so yeah, they all came back, and George was sometimes there as well, and I got to meet them, but I wouldn't say I had long discussions with them because they were more interested in catching up with their old pals.
Old friends, yeah.
So we did it again for Empire Strikes Back. Empire was the first one that was actually shot, or the effects were done in our building, obviously the first one up in Marin, and the Jedi as well. We did their anniversary as well. So yeah, they all used to love coming back, telling old stories.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. I remember dragging my wife up to Redwoods from San Francisco on our honeymoon because that was doubled as Endor from Return of the Jedi, and it's very. And she'll tell you that I actually tried to find specific trees that maybe Scout speeder bikes went crashing into, and that is literally trying to separate the wood from the trees. Because when you're in Redwoods, there's a lot of trees, and they all kind of look like the right one.
Yes, there's a trend, I would say, towards a bit more practical, but it's not towards the practical that we did, which is particularly miniatures.
Yeah, and you still see a lot of use of that. There are some directors like Wes Anderson, for example, who's still doing so much in terms of miniatures.
Oh, it's almost like a character in his films.
It really is, yeah.
Sets,
yeah, and I do think there's a lot of people who've just kind of maintained that love for it.
They do. There are problems, of course, as with anything, pros and cons. We've spoken about the pros of digital is the flexibility is one of them. If you want to change the size of that dinosaur at the last minute, you can.
Right. Yeah, true.
Yeah.
If you can't change the size of the spaceship that we've just built and spent 6 weeks building.
But you get to put it on your shelf when you've finished with it. You can't do that with an image.
Not usually, because they've usually been blown up.
Oh, true. Good point, yeah.
There's not a lot of memorabilia around our workshop, I must say. Not that's not charred anyway.
Yeah, little chunks and bits.
I didn't actually realise until you mentioned at the top, Tim, that Lawrence of Arabia is your favourite movie. I knew you loved it a lot, but I didn't know it's your number one. Am I right in thinking you might have met
somebody?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's partly my favourite movie because it was my mum's favourite movie.
Yeah.
That's certainly back in the day. But as I got more into the film industry and I began to appreciate what David Lean had done without CG, I was just blown away. And the more I learned about how it's done today, the more impressed I was by what he did. And I did always love the movie, and it's probably in my top 3, certainly. But yeah, so for his 80th birthday, Bob Harris did a renovation of the 70mm print of Lawrence, put some scenes back in that had been cut back in the day.
Oh, wow.
even found the old optical recordings of sound and treated those, digitized those, and put all that in. If the actors were still alive, they went back and recorded certain things. So it was a renovation of the 70mm print of Lawrence that was showed at the Cannes Film Festival. So I'd been going to Cannes since about 85 as a Dolby rep. As I said, we go to these places to make sure the director's happy with how his Dolby films looks and sounds. We would go there every year and check out all the theaters, and particularly the main one, which has got, if I remember, it's a 30-meter screen, huge, 2,000 seats.
Wow.
And they were going to play the 70mm print of Lawrence in there for David Lean. Steve Southgate, who was back in the day an executive at Columbia, called me and said, "Can you come and check the print with me?" So I went to the Odeon, Leicester Square, to check that print, and in walks David Lean.
Wow.
I could not believe it. He didn't stay for the whole movie, but he sat for about 4 reels of it, and we'd be sat there watching this amazing, beautiful 70mm print of Lawrence, and David Lean would lean across every now and then and he'd say, "You see this shot here? This is how I made it," and and I know the reason my mom loved it was probably mostly because of Omar Sharif. I've learned that in my older age. When Omar Sharif's character comes out of the mists on the haze on the horizon towards camera, he was saying, "Oh yeah, I had a special lens built just for this shot. It's called the David Lean lens. It's never been used again on any movie." And if you look at that shot, you'll see all the black rocks in the desert. They all seem to point towards that horizon, which leads your eye to the spot where he comes out of the haze. And he said, "Oh yeah, all those stones were put there by hand.
Wow.
Millions of them by
Wow.
thousands of hands."
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I remember studying that film in college just because of the compositions.
And I studied it as well for my degree, Lawrence of Arabia. But I've said, because that is my favorite anecdote that I've ever heard in this industry, and that's why I wanted you to tell it. So thank you, Tim.
As an unusual and not so great ending in that, during the screening at Cannes, we're playing it, and I'm sure you'll remember it's my favorite edit in all of movie history, is as he strikes the match and it cuts to the sunrise. There's two suns in the camera, and it's deep orange in the top 2/3 of the screen and deep black in the bottom third. And it's just an amazing cut. And as that happens, I'm waiting to see this on this 30-meter screen, right, which has been set up perfectly for this screening. That cut happens on a reel change, because back in the day, we used to go from one reel to another. And back in the day, we used to have different projectors for the different reels. Well, because Cannes plays 2 movies a day, they have multiple projectors as well. So they still play reels on different projectors. And as it switched from projector 1 to projector 2, it came up with the sunrise. All we saw was this beautiful sunrise and a big black silhouette of a hand going across it, because one of the projectionists was actually cleaning the port glass of that projector, not knowing it was the one that was about to be used.
That's just honestly.
He didn't work for Dolby, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, he probably never worked again. Thank you so much for this, Tim. What I want to do is I want to finish off with a little bit of fun, because for those people who don't know, Tim's very kindly has agreed to be an EP on our project. I've known him for years, and he's a good friend. And when our top 10 episodes dropped, he messaged me saying he may well want to come off being executive producer on our movie, because neither Jay or I picked E.T. as our Spielberg film. I wanted to set him the same challenge, because one entry per director, one entry per franchise is tricky. So I did give you a little bit of notice that I was going to ask you this.
You did. So you know my number one.
Your number one sci-fi film of all time is E.T., not Star Wars.
They're close.
They're close.
Yeah.
Okay.
1 and 2.
One and two. Okay, so let's... How many have you got?
I love the emotion of E.T.
Yes.
But, you can't deny the impact of Star Wars. You know?
Yeah.
So partly it's to do with the time as well, when you're seeing it, right? As you mentioned in your top 10, it's everything that surrounds.
Context is important. So how many? If you got 6 or 5, I'll count you
So I
down
got
from
5,
6 to
but
5.
you might reject one of my all-time favorite movies. I'll get to that
Okay.
fifth. So yeah, E.T. and Star Wars certainly are up there. I also love almost anything that Zemeckis has made.
Yes.
So Back to the Future original
Yeah.
is way up there as well. That was the one that really made me realize the importance or the fantastic use of the plant and the payoff. It's like everything in that movie is either a plant or paying off an earlier plant.
So
Yeah.
true. So
And
true.
I just love that. So that's way up there as well. And then so that's 1, 2, 3. So fourth would be my Ridley Scott one, which is tough, right? To choose a Ridley
Yeah, it
movie as
is.
this one.
So just to remind the audience, Jay went with Alien. I went with Blade Runner. So what have you gone with, Tim?
I went with The Martian.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
I love
See,
that film.
I love it as well. I do love it as well.
But again, it's partly context because we did a special screening of it at my studio, and afterwards we had a Q&A with Andy Weir, the writer of
Oh,
it.
cool. That's really cool.
Adam Savage from Mythbusters hosted it. Andy was super interesting, commenting that how he tried to make it as real science as possible, but realized that sometimes you have to use some creative license. So he apologetically spoke about those areas that were not true science. And then after recently, I read his Hail Mary, which is another great one. I just love it when he sciences the heck out of things, right? Not only Matt Damon, but Andy Weir does as well. So Hail Mary is another one that is just shouting out to be made, I think, as another great movie from one of his books. So my other one that is a film that I really love, and I'm sliding it into sci-fi because my favorite subgenre of sci-fi is time travel.
Hot Tub Time Machine.
But and it's also written by like one of the best writers ever, in my opinion. About Time by Richard Curtis.
Okay. Wow.
I don't know that film.
Right? So it's not sci-fi time travel in that there's no science behind it. It's a genetic defect in these people that allows them to jump in time. But that's as far as the science goes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And the rest is just a great exploration of what would you do if you got a second chance, if you could do things over.
Very cool.
But in case you threw that out, because it's
No,
not
I'm
real
not throwing it out at all.
I did have Sunshine in there because I love Danny Boyle. Although I really think it's more of an Alex Garland film than a Danny Boyle film. And I think it's a great concept as well. But there's so many to choose from. I don't know how you came up with 10 even. I like the 80s as well. And I might have even had RoboCop on there.
Oh, okay.
Really? Yeah.
But I couldn't put it on there because Paul Verhoeven is the only director that came close to throwing me out of the studio. So
Really?
Yeah.
Because he's out there, isn't he? His films are out there. Is he out there as well? Yeah.
Apparently so, but the crew didn't tell me that before I arrived.
Right,
So,
okay.
He'd already threatened to fire half a dozen of them in the preceding 6 weeks that they'd been mixing. It was his first film for Hollywood, but it was done in Amsterdam, just outside, and it was called Flesh and Blood. And the pressure was on, obviously. It's his first big film for Hollywood. But apparently, he's quite a volatile character. So I go in there. This is also my first film done internationally as a Dolby guy. So I go in there and I do my bit and I make some minor changes to the listening environment to make sure that what they're hearing is what they're recording, which is part of our job. And I did that. And he came in the next day and listened to it and he says, "What's changed?"
Oh, geez.
So then there's a big discussion. Well, this new guy who just showed up changed things. He went apoplectic.
Did he?
So that whole day was lost as we argued this through. And I was arguing that if you don't make these changes, you'll never hear your film the same again. Because every theater, if it's lined correctly, will replay it differently. And I also argued that because what he'd been listening to was too quiet, he'd been pushing the audio tracks to make it loud. And by doing so, he was getting distortion. So I argued that if you get the speakers to where they should be, then it'll also sound better as well as be more reproducible elsewhere. So he didn't believe me, and we went home and I got no sleep that night. We went back the next morning. I set it back to where it was. We played it. He's at one end of the console. I'm at the other end of the console. Never the twain shall meet. And he says, "Yep, we played one reel, and yep, that's exactly how it was. That's how I like it." And then we changed it to how I thought it knew it should be. And he said, "Actually, that sounds better."
Oh my gosh.
And credit to him, his hearing was superb. A, he could spot the change immediately. And B, he could hear that without that compression, his loud bits were even louder. And yet they were separated from the dialogue below. There was no distortion. He didn't realize he could hear distortion until he didn't hear it. And from that point on, I was his best friend. He told me to sit next to him. And for the rest of the whole sound mix, he was asking me what we should do.
Oh my gosh.
So that was an interesting episode.
You were probably the first Yorkshireman he'd met.
Yeah, almost the last.
Yeah. See, if he'd have known what a Yorkshireman was like, he'd have known not to argue with you. I'm going to lose this. And you wouldn't have gone through all of that.
Exactly.
Wow.
Well, then he went off to Hollywood and we never saw him again in Europe.
Yeah. Actually, one last question, Tim, and then you've been so kind for your time, but I didn't actually question you on whether the Star Wars New Hope was an easy selection, because I went with Empire Strikes Back. It was the Star Wars choice easy for you, that first one, you saw it in 77, it blew you away. Is that what makes that your favorite? Yeah.
I know most people would agree with you that the better film is the second, but it's just the experience of seeing that for the first time and what it did to me and my career. Well, it wasn't long after that either that that was 77, so it was in the early 80s that I was on Willow, and that was at Abbey Road. Well, being a musician, being able to go and work and a big Beatles fan to go to Abbey Road, and George was there with Ron Howard and Jamie Horner and to see for the first time in my career an orchestra in a major studio playing live to the movie up above them, projected on a screen behind them, was just like an emotional experience for me that I'll never forget. So things with music as well, they have a strong connection with me because of that. And as you said, big Beatles fan. So the first time I got to work with them, I worked with Paul on a little thing that he did about singing frogs. But did a couple of screenings with him, and he was the nicest guy. And George Harrison was a major investor for indie films in England.
Really?
He had a company called Handmade Films, and they financed the Python films. They financed a lot of films through the 80s and 90s. So he would often show up at screenings and not mixes, but screenings. And I actually got to go to his house one time to install equipment in his studio so that the music, a big part of getting everything correct in the mixing studio, the music came in pre-mixed. So what they do in their studio can have a big impact on how it sounds in the film studio and thereafter in the theater. So we then also would start going to music studios and making sure they were aligned the same way.
That makes a lot of sense.
So I went to a lot of major music artists' houses, studios, including George, and a little guy who had a studio in West London called Lilliard Studios. I worked on his first films. He was doing indie films. That was Hans Zimmer.
Really? Wow.
That little guy.
That guy.
That's awesome.
He did fairly well.
Yeah. Yeah, not bad. Not bad.
A lot of these people I worked with ended up working really closely with Ridley, and I never did, which is a little bit of a disappointment for me.
Yeah. So you can't have two Yorkshiremen on a set. You can't.
Well, maybe that's it.
The explosions everywhere.
Speaking of explosions, yeah.
Yeah.
Tim, I have one last question for you. Are there any innovations you see sort of on the horizon coming up?
I'm not giving up on 3D. There's got to be a way to do it that doesn't give you a headache.
Oh, wow.
All these innovations in sound and to some extent visual effects as well. When they're first used by a director, he goes over the top in showing off that technology, right? Because it's a new toy.
Yeah.
So when we first went, well, the stereo audio recordings, when we all got stereos in our homes, everything was ping ponging from left to right, and it was the same with surround sound. When we got that in the theater, the number of times I would have to tell, usually less experienced directors or mixers, no, don't put too much on the surrounds, because it can get distracting. And then with digital audio, I'm sure we'd all agree that early on we suddenly had this dynamic range from the quiet to the loud that was, twice as much as we'd ever had before with optical sound, and they used it.
Yeah.
So those early movies, and some extent the current ones as well, but they're a little bit better, were just excruciatingly loud because they could be. And I hate to think how many loudspeakers we blew up around the world.
All right, Tim, thank you so much for sitting down with us. This has been great. So many great stories coming from you. If people want to see some of your work, I'll just list off some titles here that we didn't even get to today. Lone Ranger, we talked about. Pacific Rim, Elysium, Noah, Transformers, Age of Extinction, The Maze Runner, Jurassic World, Rogue One, which I know Ian's a big fan of. So thank you for being here and sharing all of this with us.
Thank you so much, buddy. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I enjoyed it. Speak to you soon.
Popcorn in Orbit is produced by the Shooting Eye and Ice River Pictures.